Well, hey everyone, welcome back to Observe. In today's video, we're going to be analyzing something a little bit differently. It's going to be over Chris Watts as we've done before. However, this time around, we're going to be treating this as if we were looking at it to do a study. You'll see what I mean in a second. More on that after the intro. This video is sponsored by Raycon. Raycon is shaking up the technology industry by designing premium wireless audio devices for half the price without compromising on the quality. Furthermore, from the way they design their products to the way they price them, Raycon prioritizes their customer experience from the start to the finish. I use my everyday earbuds whenever I need to leave the house and do some work. They connect very easily to my editing laptop and have a 32-hour battery life with 8 hours of continual playtime. With over 50,000 5-star reviews, it shouldn't be too surprising for you when I tell you that they also sound excellent. They have multiple equalized sound settings that are optimized for various specific content styles. The silky smooth satin finish on the buds are accompanied by IPX6 water resistance against things like heavy splashes or perhaps brief submersion. Raycon's attention to quality and comfort extends from there to the 5 pairs of silicone gel tips included with each pair of everyday earbuds that you buy. So with that in mind, if you would like to help support the channel here and get a discount on some new earbuds that I use, go to buyraycon.com/observe or check the link in the description of this video now to be able to get 15% off your order. No matter what purpose you need the earbuds for, they are an excellent option for your listening ventures. Again, go to buyraycon.com/observe or click the link in the description of this video right now to be able to go and get 15% off of your order. Thanks again to Raycon for sponsoring this video, and back to our regularly scheduled programming. For those of you who don't know anything about the Chris Watts case, I have done several videos on it here in the past, and I suggest going and checking those out if you would like to be able to see the story of that. However, today we're focusing on one specific part of one specific interrogation, and that is the portion of the polygraph between Agent Tammy Lee and Chris Watts. We're going to go through that and break down what they do and why it was so brilliant and how it does also apply to the field of nonverbal communication, how you can use these sorts of techniques in similar situations, and also hopefully it'll be a little bit entertaining as well. Before we go ahead and begin the interrogation, a little bit on Tammy Lee. She's most known for her work on the Watts case. From the age of 14, Lee wanted to be a part of law enforcement after getting inspired by the movie Silence of the Lambs. She joined the Colorado Bureau of Investigation and completed a 10-week polygraph certification in 2013, finishing at the very top of her class. Upon being assigned to the Watts case, Lee began studying the victims, and that was when she developed a connection with Shanann and her kids. This connection helped fuel her determination to see the case through to the very, very end. So that's enough talking. What we'll do is we'll walk through various portions of this. I'll explain what's going on, and then there will be a portion where you'll get to watch what's going on, take some notes for yourself, and then see how they stack up. And then after that test period, there's actually a time where we can kind of test to see what we might be able to discover from the actual questions as well. You'll see what I mean in a second. Let's begin.
I use this to measure the rate of blood flow through your body during the test. So we've actually found it's much more, we get a much better reading if we put it on your calf instead of your arm. So are you okay? Did you know we use these? Okay.
And I use these.
Right.
What's the map for?
The what?
The map. Acetone.
Oh, sorry. So that's a motion sensor mat. What that does is obviously detect motion and movement in your body. So that's how important it will be that you remain completely still during the testing. If you move your little toe, I mean, as you know, with lifting weights and stuff, everything happens from your core. you move your little toe, obviously it's going to register on my keypad. So it's very, very sensitive, so that's how important it's going to be that you remain completely still.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and pause it here. So this initial little part here, it's been cut up a fair bit so that we could speed it on through, but she's setting up the device itself and getting it ready for Chris, and she's also not making any attempt to hide the complexity of the device, and that's intentional. It helps build the suspense and the intensity of what's happening in that instance. So as they're hooking up the various portions to his fingers, putting the mat underneath, hooking it up to his chest, all of the different areas, he is feeling more and more and more intensity from that. More strain is coming from that. He's feeling more pressure from that, and that does make it to where it will be easier to read spikes in his nonverbal communication. Now, there are other aspects of what she is doing that is pretty beneficial as well, down to even the color of her clothing being blue, which is seen as a trustworthy color, even down to your subconscious level. And then there have been some people saying the stripes can maybe mean prison time, and that's not necessarily true. Maybe that's how bold they were going with it, is they wanted to wear black and white stripes to indicate possible prison time, but I'm not sure about that side of things. However, this initial part was excellently done, as it does build the intensity of things. It really does make it feel like there's a lot at play here, and that's good. So let's go ahead and continue on through to see how that actually plays out and everything.
This is what we call a directed lie practice test, okay? And I'm going to move my chair over here. So obviously a directed lie practice test kind of gives you an indication that I probably want you to lie on the practice test, right? I don't want you to lie yet. I will tell you at that point that I want you to lie, okay?
Okay, so in this part, I went ahead and fast forwarded through the area where she's explaining where to lie, because this is where we get to work kind of side by side as a test format. So they're going to go through and ask a series of questions, and Chris is going to answer those questions the same way every time, except one of them is a known lie scenario. So as people watching here, we'll be able to go through and hear these questions. I would like you to take some notes as to what you notice in each response to his responses, because each of them are single word responses, yeses or nos. And then after that, we'll go back through it again together, breaking down some of the stuff that might be useful in the actual case. Now, this is centered around a similar process of doing an actual nonverbal decoding of a video clip. This, however, is still a much more watered down version of it. This would be an introductory step. Maybe there's much more that would go into this, but this can kind of help you get somewhat of a feel. So let's go ahead and watch these questions. Take notes. There will be a little area afterwards where you could pause it and take the rest of your notes as well. But make note of any of his nonverbal and verbal patterns, and then we'll compare at the end.
Okay, so during the testing, I'm going to leave this right here. You need to look in the area of this clipboard. You can't look side to side, up, down, wherever Chris wants to look. So I will tell you when the test is going to begin, and then I will tell you when the test is going to end. The test is about to begin. Please remain still.
I want to pause it real quick here just to make a note. You'll notice the amount of time that they're waiting in between. That is not a necessary amount of time. You could even see that from the follow-up questions where they're not doing this practice run. This is partially due to calibration, but then also it helps build the intensity again. Every single time that a question is asked and there's a long pause, it allows the person to ruminate on what they have said and build discomfort if they've lied. So this is excellently done as well. They make no indication of wanting to hurry Chris along or anything along those lines. It's just allowing everyone in the room to sit in the uncomfortable silence after each question. So that does help build accuracy when it comes to reading the polygraph. Let's continue.
Regarding what number you wrote on the piece of paper, did you write the number 1?
No.
Did you write the number 2?
No.
Did you write the number 3?
No.
Did you write the number 4?
No.
Did you write the number 5?
No.
This portion of the test is complete. Please remain still while I take the instrument out of operation.
Okay, so now this is the time where you write down your notes. If you did not write down notes after each question, then you can go back through and do that now. After each time, try to write down notes about their tone, about the movement that Chris does, about the way that he says the responses, see if there's any time in between the answer and the question and the answer. Any notes that you can make about just the various details of those responses is important. And then so once you've gone through that and you caught back up to this point, now we can continue back through and I'll show some of the things that stuck out to me. And then we'll be able to apply this basic reading that we've gotten to his actual answers later on, to the genuine questions, see if anything comes through, and then that would be a specific tell for Chris Watts. So let's go ahead and watch.
Regarding what number you wrote on the piece of paper, did you write the number 1?
No.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and pause it after each one here so that we can kind of talk a little bit about it and so I can explain what you're looking at on the screen. So you get to see the sound print to what he's saying there so that you could see how the vocal tone actually flows as well. So up here at the top, you'll see across as he answers each question, there will be a sound print of what his response looks like. And that sound print is also important because it allows us to know how that sound was said. And so at this first moment here, he answers rather softly. It's the first question that would make sense if he's nervous or feeling any sort of agitation on just general levels. That first question might be rather soft. However, you could see the noise profile is fairly uniform there. And then also as he's responding, he does a very, very light bodily movement as he's just saying a word. Many people do. You oftentimes will move without really noticing that you are unless you're told specifically to not move. So he is gently moving on these. That's expected and anticipated. So from what we're seeing on this one, I wouldn't say that anything in this seems to be suspicious as of yet. Let's continue.
Did you write the number 2?
No.
Okay, so now we've had 2 no's here and they sound lightly different. The second one does even sound a little bit more hollow than the first one. So that could be seen as a red flag. Perhaps he's not forcing enough behind his words. He's not projecting very much, so there might be a lack of confidence. very, very little to say so far. However, if you look at the sound prints, it still has a very similar sound print as well. He's saying it very, very similarly, and he's still doing very, very small micro movements as he's speaking. Along with that, I've been paying attention to his breathing rate as well, and it seems to be remaining pretty constant. So far we've seen 2 responses that seem to be fairly genuine. Let's continue watching to see what else happens.
Did you write the number 3?
No.
Okay, so this one sounds interesting to me. It doesn't come out as clearly as the other ones did. It had more of a hollow sound on the nose before, where it was a no and a no, and this one sounds a little bit more like he might not be projecting as much as he did before. And it shows up in the noise print as well. As you could see across the top of the screen there, there's an area where it draws out and has a different pattern. That odd shape comes from the sound that he made that was different, and the volume was a little bit less. However, along with that, in this response, he remains completely and perfectly still. The 2 responses before, he does little tiny movements, and then he remains very, very still as well. So we've seen this odd mouth shape that he's made while saying the word. We've heard the pitch and tone drop off a bit as it sounds a little bit more soft and muffled as he's not speaking as clearly, and he completely freezes on this response, whereas on the other 2 he was doing light, normal, natural movements. This would be seen as a spike in his nonverbal communication. You would want to make note there as a possible point of desynchronization before continuing forward.
Did you write the number 4?
No.
Now we're back to the normal audio pattern that we saw here before, where he's saying no as he had before. It's now back to the same hollow mouth sound that he had. And you can hear the projection come back into his voice almost as if it's sighing a sigh of relief. And this would actually make sense if the time before this was his point of deceit. After a point of deceit is moved by, people will oftentimes feel relief, and that will come out in their nonverbal communication via self-soothing gestures or other slighter signs like the slightly relaxed and projected tone that he uses here. So that would make sense there. It still is lining up with the audio patterns, but there is another question here, so let's go ahead and look at that.
Did you write the number 5?
No.
Okay, so with that, even just looking at the verbal patterns alone, just the visual vocal ones that I've put up here, we can see pretty clearly that there are some differences between each and every one, but some have more in common than others. Now, number 3 and number 5 seem to be a little bit similar on some levels in that it seems to be elongated. However, that being said, if you look at the vocal patterns of the rest of them, they all line up fairly well except for number 3. Number 3 is an outlier there, and even non-verbally along with that, besides just the tone that we can see here, we saw a number of other things that could be a red flag, with a freezing of action that had been there before as he remained completely stationary, and then also the difficulty in the tone and pitch that he was having while he responded in the actual word itself. So watching through that, then that would let us know that number 3 is the most suspicious one, and number 5 would be the second most suspicious. So try to explore down those avenues. And sure enough, that is the one that he was lying with, so we now have a fairly decent idea as to how Chris can lie in this specific instance. That will help us understand his baseline a lot more solidly. Now, is this a complete baseline? Absolutely not, but it does help add clarity for later on. So if we see some of these similar patterns in his responses later, perhaps a drawing out, perhaps a dropping off of tone, perhaps a little bit of a muffling as he doesn't pronounce the words as clearly because he's not as confident in them, maybe some freezing will happen happen in there. And then also looking for those release moments as well to maybe give a sign that the prior one could have been more important. So with all of that in mind, we're going to go ahead and go through the actual questions. We'll watch all the way through, you make your notes, and then we'll watch through it again together, and then we'll talk about it at the very end. Let's go.
You can relax. How'd you feel? You did great. You remembered to lie and everything. That was awesome. So you obviously are a really bad liar. Have people told you that before? Like the second you tell a lie, like they can tell like on your face that, because the second you lied to them, number 3, like I don't know if you heard me clicking, but I had to like turn down the sensitivity because you were starting to go off the page. So that is what I need to see as a polygrapher, because that tells me that you know it's wrong to tell a lie. And you're actually having a significant reaction when you lie, so that is awesome. So thank you for being a horrible liar. No, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. We don't want to be good liars, so.
Ooh, Chris is not happy at this point, and this was just so brilliantly done by Tammy Lee. So bringing up this, it's quite obvious that you're a terrible liar. You see, he completely freezes except for his breathing increases a little bit, and that's not a good sign. That's being caught. That's one of the fight, flight, or freeze responses, obviously. So he's sitting there feeling panicked now because they've said that he's terrible at lying. And that's adding more pressure. These are all mind games that she is playing so beautifully on Chris, and it works very excellently. So now that we've built this all the way up to this point, now we're at the actual point of being able to dive into the polygraph. We have shown that the polygraph has a lot of intricate features, and that's added a lot of tension and pressure to the scenario. We've also gone through this testing area where then we find out that perhaps he's actually a terrible liar, and that adds even more pressure to the scenario. And now we're going to the actual instance itself. So let's see what we're able to see during this time. Let's continue.
Thank you for being a horrible liar. Okay, can you let me know when you're ready to begin? During this part of the test, I want you to focus on the back of the chair, okay? Not looking up, down, side to side, anything like that. I want you to do that.
Was I doing that?
No, you did great. But obviously the clipboard is gone now, so your area of focus is going to be like in this area, okay?
Okay.
All right, you ready?
Let's do it.
Okay, stay still. The test is about to begin. Please remain still. Regarding Shanann's disappearance, do you intend to answer all of the questions truthfully?
Yes.
Is your first name Christopher?
Yes.
Did you physically cause Shanann's disappearance?
No.
Were you born in 1985?
Yes.
Are you lying about the last time you saw Shanann?
No.
Do you know where Shanann is now?
No.
This portion of the test is complete. Please remain still while I take the instrument out of operation.
Okay, so now write down your notes. If you need to go back through, this is where you go back through, obviously like it was before. So try to take note of how he responded. What did his body do? His movements, his tone, the pausing, everything that you can. And then we can come back here and we'll dive right back in and compare notes and talk about it at the very, very end. So let's go.
Regarding Shanann's disappearance, do you intend to answer all of the questions truthfully?
Yes.
So on this first question, what I want to make note of is just how hollow and fragile his tone sounds. That yes, it does not sound confident whatsoever. Now, this is the first question of the interview, of this segment of the interrogation, I suppose would be a better way to say that. So perhaps it's general nerves. However, as we've seen in the past, whenever we see this difficulty in tone come out, it could be actually a point of desynchronization or possible deception from Chris. So we do want to make a note of that. So if we have any other yeses or nos, we need to compare and cross-examine both of those to see if there's any patterns that come out. Let's go ahead and continue forward.
Is your first name Christopher?
Yes.
Okay, so now we have two different responses of yes. We have the first yes, which we thought sounded a little bit hollow, perhaps not as projected. And then we have the second one, which is a little bit lower register, and it is much more full and verbose tonally. So if that's the case, we know obviously that his name is Christopher, and we know that's a truthful answer when he says yes. And if it sounds more verbose, and it does line up non-verbally with it, then the question is, why would that show up that way as opposed to the time before? Now, it could still be the first question is the nervous questions. Sure, perhaps, but also it does happen to correlate with one of the more suspicious or incriminating questions. So it is definitely a red flag at this point. That hollow, not as forced yes would be considered a red flag or a spike in his nonverbal communication as compared to the very genuine yes thereafter. Let's continue watching.
Did you physically cause Shanann's disappearance?
No.
Now I want to pause this here because I am seeing a similar pattern to the vocal tone, the visual tone that we can have here. The actual sound stamp looks very similar to the number 3 sound stamp that he answered last time with the 2 spikes on the top there as he's drawn out the word no, and his mouth is not making as hollow of an O sound. Again, it's very muffled with a no. So with that in mind, that would be another red flag that directly correlates to the time that he was deceitful in the test. So that's another one that we would want to pay attention to. And that's not great news because so far now, both questions that have to do with the case itself, that would be incriminating for Chris, he has shown similar tells to the time that he was deceitful in the polygraph test. That's not great news. It could be a coincidence at this point still, but we're going to keep watching.
Were you born in 1985?
Yes.
This is interesting. So after this, there's a substantial fall off. So the first no was a little bit more strained. It sounded more muffled. And now we have this rather hollow, almost relieved sounding yes coming afterwards to the question about his age. And this does line up. Once there's an important question and then there's a less important question afterwards, then you might see that fall off. Like we even saw in the prior example from question 3 to 4, there was a dramatic fall off as he was feeling more relaxed about deception. Technically, Tammy Lee wasn't wrong. Chris was not a great liar at all. He tried to be a great liar and he wasn't. And this is showing up here as well. Let's continue watching.
Are you lying about the last time you saw Shanann?
No.
During this time, all that I would be able to make note is that it sounded soft and a little bit elongated. It does not have the double spike at the top like we saw visually on the other ones. However, it is longer than the other no's that we have seen, so he is drawing it out some, and he is still speaking a little more softly, and you can hear a little bit more muffly sound in his voice. However, on this part, that would be very, very light. So possibly, but not nearly as significant as the other times that we've seen in this specific interrogation portion. Let's continue.
Do you know where Shanann is now?
No.
Okay. So I'll go ahead and stop it here. This is going to be the end of everything here. So we went through and we saw the various responses. Let me know what your thoughts were in the comments below all the way through. Even if you want to interact as you continue on through this, that's very, very cool. So as we're going through, the first yes we heard was very strained. It felt rather hollow, and it could be seen as a point of deception according to his other prior test where we got to kind of establish this tell. However, that wasn't quite solid enough until we got to the second time where he had another chance to answer yes on a question that we know is definitely truthful, and we could see the tonal differences and we could even hear it come out as well. Now, all throughout this specific interrogation portion, he tried to stay extremely still non-verbally, which is good. That would be exactly what he was supposed to do. Even Tammy Lee asked him to do that because that helps with the read for the machine as well. Now, that being said, that means that I wasn't able to see a lot of the micro movements that might be happening on his face or in his body during that time. So we're relying largely off of the verbal or tonal tells that we have here and then the general smaller ones that we saw earlier. But based off of that, even just looking at the visuals alone, I noticed that one, seems very sharp. The first yes seems like a very sharp intro into it, and then falls off rather quickly, letting me know it's a hollow sound like that, whereas the second yes seems to be a lot more full and rich. That first no there has that odd peak pattern in there, so that would be a question to me, even just visually, looking at just the audio, that would be a question. Why does that show up when the only other time it showed up in the past was on areas of possible deceit, and we know the sound of that is that falling off of pitch and the muffling of his voice, so why does it show up there? And then the third yes, it's very small, but it seems to have the normal hollow shape. So he has a dropped off hollow sounding yes. Could that mean deception, or could that be related to the question before and mean the release or relaxation? So then after that, we have that second no, and that second no is a little suspicious, but there's nothing to really be able to go off of with that. It just seems to be a little bit elongated. And then the third no at the very, very end is very elongated and very muffled. So with all of that in mind, this is part of how Chris Watts was able to be found out in this very first interrogation. Even after his odd TV interviews, he came in and more or less fell apart rather quickly, and it is due largely to how well Tammy Lee did. Now, there is more to this interrogation where they continue to ask questions, and Tammy Lee has a moment where they offer an out for Chris. They were asking if Chris had done it, and then Tammy Lee says, well, maybe Shannon did it, or something along those lines. And that's the problem. And so as soon as that happens, as soon as Tammy speaks that, Chris jumps to that opportunity, that has to be it. And this is one of the techniques used to be able to get a person who is guilty closer to the point of actually admitting murder. And sure enough, that is exactly what ends up happening with this. As the interrogation goes on, that ends up leaving an out for Chris to go out of, which would only have been opened by Tammy Lee making that step and offering an olive branch, so to speak, to Chris. And a lot of people offered a lot of flack to Tammy Lee for doing that, and I can't imagine why. I understand that bringing up the possibility of the mother being the murderer it sounds very cold, and indeed it would be. But the result that was achieved from that, I don't know, could have been achieved through any other way other than Tammy knowing exactly how to befriend or come alongside Chris and offer him this escape. So I thought that this was brilliantly done all the way around by Lee, and commend her greatly for the entire thing. But I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, let me know if there are any other interviews or interrogations that I might be able to look at and do something similar with. It's very rare that I can have this exact setup where we get the benefit of a question and answer test calibration period, as opposed to the real deal later on. So this just was a little bit of fun to be able to work on. So I know this is different. I know that it's not what you would normally expect on the channel, but I hope you did enjoy it. And if you did, let me know by hitting the like button, hit subscribe if you want to see more. I'm going to be doing more and more projects and videos here coming up in the near future. I'll be releasing an update video as to what all has been happening in the Observe realm and my life in general over on my other channel at some point, but that'll be in a bit. I've got some other stuff to get to first. I am becoming active on social media, so either myself or a member of my team will be able to reach out back to you if you do reach out on there. Hopefully. There are a lot of messages, so sometimes it's a little hard to get back anyways, but we're a lot better at it now. So go ahead and follow all those different ones. I'll be posting more on there as well. You know what? I feel like that's probably all of the talking that I need to do. So without further ado, that's all that I've got for the day. My name is Logan, and you have been oh so awesome as you always are, and I will see you in the next video. Cheers, guys.